Ladies and gentlemen, today we've got the world's leading expert in recruitment. Look, we've talked to a lot of recruitment people in the past, but when I tell you Neha is the world's leading expert in bringing to the table how to hire the best talent for your companies and organizations. Neha, welcome to the show.
So excited to be here. Let's talk about how to hire amazing team members because without people, you are nothing.
That's exactly right. You are nothing. And I will reiterate that 1,000 times. Nothing without the great people. And every company I've ever built, it's all about the people. And, when we really start to get into that, hiring great people isn't luck, right? It takes a process for really developing and finding and retaining top talent. So I want to take the audience through a little bit of that and really the secrets to finding those top talent, recruiting them, and then how do you retain them?
Yep, I love that. So I've always seen people just post like random jobs like on Facebook and LinkedIn groups and it's like I'm looking for this person, I'm looking for that person and then they hire the first person they talk to. And that's like not the right way to do it at all. In fact, if you do it that way, it just tells me that you don't have a strong backbone as it relates to hiring. And I'm extremely polarized in this regard. I do think, and I know, and it's proven to me by working with many clients now, that you need a process and a system that works for you because it's not just about hiring the person, it's then about retaining them. And unless you have a strong system to hire and onboard, you're not going to be able to retain them, right? So you need to have a 3 to 5 step recruiting process that works where you can learn about them from a motivational fit, a cultural add, a technical fit, and logistics. Unless you're doing your due diligence across these 4 areas and making sure that they're talking to the right people and they have the opportunity to ask the questions and you're talking about your values, your mission, your vision, you're not going to be able to retain employees. And it's again proven over and over again. And so I see this all the time where people go into triage mode and they hire for the sake of hiring without giving it like more thought. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, this person left or I had to fire them. And they start over. And I feel like recruiting is very much like sales. It's always cheaper to keep your current customer happy than to find a new customer. It's always cheaper to keep your current talent happy than to go find new talent. If you're doing it over and over again and you're stuck in this cycle, your company is never going to be able to get to that next level. And you're not going to be able to get to that next level in leadership because your entire energy is now focused on replacing instead of growing and developing.
Well, as an entrepreneur, there's some, like with construction world, I, look, I love construction. It's who I am. I'm a construction guy. I've since I'm a little kid, I've been doing construction. I know it. I feel it. I can sit in any room with people and I speak construction well. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to hiring, right, you're right. My first employees were literally friends that I band-aided together and I hung them. They were like scarecrows. They were like literally people I taped them to a piece of wood and they kind of hung out in my office, but they were not qualified or talented and they didn't have, but at the time I was still developing the company. I feel like at the time I started, there was a lot of information I didn't know about the people that I wanted to have on the team. And it took a while for me to figure out the company itself and what I was looking for, and B, how to find those people.
Mm-hmm. I think this is very common. And I think this is why I feel like a lot of times hiring gets pushed to the back burner. Because what happens is a lot of times people will unfortunately take their team and then overburden them with more responsibilities. And then you're wondering why your team's burnt out and your team's leaving. And the truth is, you've got to find the right people to do the right job. I actually just finished working with a client. She wanted one person to the job do the job of 3 people and wanted to pay them not a good salary. And I was like, we cannot work together. Like this is not the right the right client I want to work with because you've got to care for the welfare of your people that are at the company, right? And so a lot of times when you're expanding, people are like, well, we want to see the cash come in before we hire people. But then the one person that you have, you're making them do 3 different jobs. And that one person is eventually going to be like, screw it, I'm done, right? And they're going to leave you. And then you're going to be in a world of hurt and trouble because now you're trying to like do what they're doing and do business development and do everything a leader is supposed to do.
It's the classic chicken and the egg, right? You
Yep,
don't when you start a company, you don't have all the money you want, right?
exactly.
That you really need to grow. And if I could, I would absolutely go for the top talent, start with that. But a lot of that as a leader, what I find out is you're growing. The leader to himself or herself is growing. Right, you get the
Hmm.
entrepreneur who starts a company, and they in themselves are growing to figure out how to grow a company. Right, just there's personal development as a leader going on. And
Yep.
then as the company's growing, right, you're starting to have company development, right? You got the processes and procedures and what you're doing to follow. And actually, in the beginning, I was literally defining the company. When I first started CDO Group, we were a construction management company, and at the time, there was no such thing as outsourced construction management on the
Hmm.
retail world, right? And every time I would talk to somebody, I was literally inventing the job. So let alone how would I hire someone when I didn't even know what we're going to do yet, right? So there lies some of the dilemma that I notice as a transition. So being able to know, all right, being able to get far enough along to get someone that can do a majority of things right, right? So I think that's a key part there. Being able to find, all right, maybe at first you're just finding someone that can, and they're going to have to grow with you, right?
Yep.
Because I feel like that's a big part of it is like just saying, hey, look, as we develop this company, as we're developing this group, as we're developing the scope, your talent, you may grow with us, and some people may love that. Some people may go, that's exactly what I'm looking for, a company that I can grow for. In fact, I find that there's a group of employees that love that. And then
Hmm.
there's a group of employees that have no desire for any of that. They want to have a stagnant scope of work. They want to make sure that, they kind of prefer not coming to work in the middle of they're not looking for that.
Yep, I agree. I think it's really just about your mentality as a leader that's going to shape your organization. And one of the pillars I like to call it the compass leadership system, right? Which we have, which is how do you as a leader how are you able to navigate your just not just you but your company to get to the next level? And a lot of it is learning to get uncomfortable. And this is what a lot of leaders are scared of. They don't want to take the risks. They don't want to, think about who to hire because they're scared of dreaming big, right? They're kind of scared of like staying stagnant. And then a lot of it is also once you do find somebody you want to hire, then there's a trust issue. And I see that a lot of time, especially with the CEO that I just told you about. She's like, I don't know if I can trust this person or two people to do the job, right? But you've got to be able, this is why you need a system and a process. You've got to be able to interview people for what their qualities or their skills and qualifications are, and then ultimately allow them to own that, right? Because if you micromanage everything, you might as well do it, I feel, at that time, right? Like it's really important for you to be able to like let go and really just, I mean, still manage them obviously because they're part of your business, part of your business. But again, trust them, that trust your process and trust them to do the job once they are hired. I think that's the biggest thing. And then the third thing is, again, feeling uncomfortable, getting uncomfortable, allowing that trust, and then communication. I think the communication piece, a lot of people hire people and there's a lack of communication on expectations. That has to be delivered early on in the process. Like, what are the expectations coming in, right? And so, again, someone who's used to working at a big enterprise company and having a black and white job description is not going to be as comfortable as someone who's worked with a startup, right? Because startup, there's constant evolving and changing, especially in the early stage. Every day there's a new thing happening. Every day there's a new fire to put out. And you want people who are versatile and who can jump at the chance of saying, how do I solve this problem? And they have the mentality of taking ownership of different things, but also being very problem solving instead of like, I don't know, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do, and I'm just not going to do anything and act on it. So it just depends again on the communication and the expectations that you're setting during the interview process and the onboarding process. That's going to make for a either really positive relationship or just something that's not going to work.
It's funny because I find there's all kinds of different people. What you hit on was right on point. I often use people. I use the pen theory, right? Imagine this pen, right? And everybody lives on the pen, right? They all live on, and no matter where you are on the pen, it's perfect. And by the way, if you're listening, I'm holding up a pen, and no matter where you are on the pen, it's perfect. But there's different personalities, and there's different parts of the pen, right? So my favorite part, like, look up in the front here, you've got the entrepreneur. Right up in here, they're creative ones. Things are happening around the entrepreneur, and right around the tip, there's the people that like to be around the entrepreneur and they support it. Without that, the entrepreneur, the pen would never go right straight. Right? You need someone who kind of guides that entrepreneur and that creative person in the development of the company, the development of the organization. And right behind there, you've got people who like to support those people. Right? They don't want to be the pen. They don't want to be the point of the pen. But they want to be around the team. They like to be around the team. And the further as you go back, there are people who like systems and operations, and the person that's the button, right? The person that makes the clicker happen, the person that makes the pen go in and out. Those are all the process people, and they're different personalities. Now, every once in a while, I'll hire someone that wants to be, they're like, oh no, I want to be like those guys up at the front, right? And they'll go from the back of the pen. They might be in the accounting department. They want to go, I want to go to business development. And all of a sudden they'll find out, yeah, listen, I'm not built for this. Like life isn't, the job doesn't work that way. I don't like it's not very formal. It's not very systemized. It's a lot of that development stuff. And then they'll realize it's too crazy. I need to go back to the other side. And likewise, I'll get people in the front who get too carried away or too busy. They want to slow down. They want more system, and they go back in the back and they realize, no, this doesn't work for me. You got to find the people that fit the place they're going to be on the pen, right? Where are they going to fit? How? Or some people say on the bus. Get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. But find people in what seat on the bus we want them to be on there, and find their personality to fit that. So if they're into being around the entrepreneur and development of a company, great. But if you bring someone on that does not like that and you're trying to force them into doing that, they're gonna go crazy and it's gonna backfire on us. And you're gonna spend a lot of time getting rid of them or recycling through another employee. And like you talked about, that's a pretty big expense to a company cycling through employees.
I 100%. And I think the way you solve that to as much as possible, to as big of an extent as possible, is one, being transparent, right? And having an interview process where you do, I'm a big believer in like technical test projects. So like if someone claims to be a content writer, I will do a paid assessment and see if they actually are a content writer and they are good at what they do. And so if someone claims that they can be an operations manager or VP of product, like give them like a 2-3 hour test project where you pay them for their time and then you really understand if that's what they're going to do. And then having evaluations every couple of weeks, right? Like how are you feeling, how are you doing, having that open door. I feel like a lot of times people just get a job and they stay there for months and months and months and years and years and years, and no one's really like asking them. And even us people, we have to be honest. So if you're unhappy doing what you're doing, speak up, speak out, right? Just say, hey, I thought this would be a good fit. Is there anything other in the department or in the company that I can be a better fit for? This is what I truly enjoy, because we change too, right? As we grow, we evolve, our likings change. And sometimes where you started off might not be where you will end up. And that's okay. That's part of being a human being, right? But you have to speak up. And as managers and leaders, you've got to ask these questions. You've got to do anonymous surveys. You've got to do just, check ins with them so that you understand where that person is, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't just want people, you want people who deliver, who go above and beyond, who are loyal, who are going to be retained, right? People who are going to give back and make your company the next best thing that's happening in the world, right? You don't want just people there for the sake of having people and having people on payroll. Nobody wants that. If you want to be a successful business owner, that's not really the answer to do that. So I really think like having this open line of transparency is critical as you scale.
So as you bring people on, I've stumbled on this, and I've stuck. Out of all the places where I feel like developing companies will struggle is in development of talent, right? So I have gone through, 26 years of owning CDO Group. I've gone through multiple formats for how we bring somebody on, right? We've had these 5-day onboarding processes. We've had 5-minute onboarding process. Here, welcome to CDO Group. Go drink off the fire hose. No
Right.
training, overtraining. We're trying to figure out, how do you figure out how much training you do with an employee as you bring them on board, right? How do you bring them in so they get a real sense that there's something special here, right? There's a process and a procedure, but that's at the same time, what I realize about new employees are, there's so much coming at them. No matter what you give them in those first couple of days
Mhm.
of training, it all goes to hell, right?
Yeah.
Because it's overwhelming, right? Just there's too
Hmm.
much. You're coming to the job, just showing up and figuring out where the bathroom's at. I always feel proud if an employee can leave day one and know where the bathroom's at, where the lunchroom's at, and how to get a cup of coffee. I'm like, all right, if you figure that out day one,
You're
you know,
good.
that's pretty good. Now,
You're
if you get
solid.
yeah, if you get to day two, and maybe just maybe you can figure out who's who. Like what's that lady do over there? What's that guy do over there? And
Hmm.
maybe you might get a good startup. But remember, they're still walking in going, all right, that guy's weird, and this guy's weird,
Yeah.
and that guy's desk is funny, and that person looks funny, and they're still, they come to the workplace with a lot of judgment themselves, right? I mean, they're being judged, and there's a lot of judgment going on. So how do you bring that? What's the right level of bringing them on and figuring out how to get them level set and get them ready to really perform?
I would say the first thing would be to ask them during the interview process, at some point, how best do they learn? Because we all learn differently, right? I'm like a doer. I learn better when I do something as opposed to like watching videos. Videos are great, and I mean they're helpful. But when I'm actually doing something, I'm like, oh, how does this work? How does that work? And I have questions come up. Some people are auditory listeners, some people are visual learners and listeners, right? So you really want to ask them, how is it that they absorb information the best way, right? And then once they give you the answer, give them the resources. So if someone's like, I learn best when I watch YouTube videos, give them training videos. If someone like me is like, I learn by doing, give me a few tasks. Don't just sit there and like overwhelm me with all the seminars and webinars and recordings and all this stuff, right? Once I'm set up on the systems, because I know that's usually the first day is like getting access to all the systems at the business, then like give me a task to do, right? Whether it's talking to people in my circle, whether it's working with different departments and talking to them and asking them questions, but just really allow them to learn the way they absorb information. And then I always like to say, like, give them a deadline, give them a task, and give them a deadline by the end of the week so they feel like they have a purpose. A lot of times when you start off, there's no deadline to do something because people are like, you're new, you're new, you're new. But actually, that's actually demotivating to a lot of people because you want to go there and you want to make an impact. If you're self motivated, you're like, man, I want to hit this out of the park. I want my week one to be like amazing. So okay, you're going to get 2 days. And then I want you to complete this project by end of the week. And it can be a simple project, but that makes you feel like the sense of accomplishment when you deliver on something, right? Like it's like, oh, I accomplished that my first week that I was here. So really motivate them to give them something to do that they can actually work on and give them a deadline, right? And then check in with them the following week. And then you can start adding on to their, I guess, task list. The other thing you can do is list out plan by week, right? So week one, week two, week three. And so that way they know what they're doing when they're getting onboarded and when the real work starts versus the onboarding is done, right? Again, setting that boundary and creating that like separation of like week one is onboarding, week two, you hit the ground running. So they know that they have a week to catch up and play catch up and learn about as much as they can. And regardless of, how little or how much there is, you're always going to feel, overwhelmed as a new employee. I mean, we've all been there in that position and you're like, what's going on? Like, there's so many people and who's this person and where's my Slack and my Zoom isn't working and all that, right? That's going to happen. That's part of the process. But I really think creating deadlines and making them feel like they accomplished something, it's going to work in their favor because they're going to feel like, oh my gosh, this was awesome. And it's also going to work in your favor because then you don't have this unending like onboarding period, so to speak.
No, no, look, having a defined process, a lot of times I'll talk about just getting some real small wins.
Mm-hmm.
We might take a project manager and just go, all right, here's what we want you to do. Today we'll figure out the toilet is. Tomorrow we'll figure out how you get your expense reports paid, and maybe that'll be like you said, a couple of days of just how do I walk around this place, and
Mm-hmm.
then we'll start with, like for a project manager, we might start him off and say, or start her off and say, I want you to go into the estimating file and we want you to pull each of the contracts for each subcontractor you're going to have. And it does a couple of things. Number one, it's a small win. It's easy to show them how to get onto this file server and then go find the subcontractor bids and make sure it matches with the contract we have with the client. And it teaches them how to go get a file, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
an easy win, but I believe small little wins like that feel great to somebody. Right now, I've
Yep.
got all 25 of my contracts or 40 contracts, whatever the subcontractors are, and now they've gone 40 times into the server. They figured out how to print, and they
Yep.
figured out how to use the system 40 times before they're under pressure, right? Because
Yep.
what we want them to do is in the middle of the battle, boom, go, boom, sword, boom, shield, boom, gun, right? They want to be able to know what their tools are, where their tools are to fight the battle they're going to have to fight every single day. And getting them there before they get in the middle of the battle, I think that's a key part. So small little wins that help them just, all right, I learned how to log into the file server. I learned
Yep.
how to go to the estimating file. All right, I'm going to have to do that somewhere in the future. All right, look, there's the general contracting side. Now I have to go to the estimating side, and now I can go pull it, and I can go look at where operations has their contract, so I can look at both. And I'm going to need those documents later on other projects. And now I've done this 40 times, so I've got a
Yep.
pretty good handle on doing that, and it's a pretty easy win. Some people will come back and have it done in a couple of hours, and some may take a couple of days. But during the process, both will have won by going through it multiple times, and and then look at a contract, figure out the language that we use, and see some similarities. I think all of those things are really key if all we do in training was able to get people to know where their tools are
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to need. Hopefully, we've hired people that have a good understanding of the work that we're going to do, and now they just need to know our kind of our flow. Where do I go get my tools?
Yep, I agree. I think a lot of it's like giving them the sense of accomplishment early on, right? So it's like, oh, I'm excited to go back on Monday after week one. You don't want them to feel deflated and like overwhelmed. And a lot of companies unfortunately do that, and they like bombard them with a lot of things, and then like the employees like, oh my gosh, I still feel behind. Like that feeling of feeling behind is like one of the worst feelings. And especially when you're starting out new, you're like, you don't want to feel behind. You want to feel like you're on top of it. You're ahead of the game. So again, like you said, giving them small projects and small milestones and then evaluating them on that and then communicating them through that, I think that's going to be gold. And that's really how you're going to foster this culture of like motivation and someone who's motivated and doesn't someone who isn't always feeling behind, especially when they're starting out.
That's great. I think that's a great spot to be in. Small little wins. It's the best trainings I've ever had. I will tell you, and not that I'm a Scientologist, but one of the best courses I ever took out of all the management training was I did a communication course with L. Ron Hubbard's group, the
Mm-hmm.
Scientology guys, and they had this communication course that I would say it was one of the best ways of learning how to train that I'd ever experienced. And I thought
Wow.
they did such a great job with it. And it was really kind of funny because at first I thought, man, this is kind of silly. So the whole course was about learning how to communicate with anybody, anywhere, at any time, right? And being able to handle and manage and control conversation. How do you start and stop the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea they started off with, and I think you'll appreciate. They literally started you off with just sitting in a chair. And I'm like, oh, so you went to a course and you read and just get this little workbook. And the first thing you practice was sitting in a chair. And somebody would walk around you and say, all right, you're doing that pretty good. I'm like, what do you mean, just sitting here? And they're like, yeah, just sit here, be present, don't fall asleep, just be present in the moment. Like, so just being there. And then the next one was sitting in front of somebody, knee to knee. You're both sitting in a chair and you sat
Mm-hmm.
knee to knee and you just looked at each other, but without staring. So how do you look, right? Confront somebody without being confrontational, right? You look at them without, and you taught, and you got a little win there, and it was great. And then the
Yep.
next one was about I'll start a sentence, and I would say something like, all right, I'll start it, and I'd like you to continue going. So let's see what I try. So the ball is,
In your court,
all right, the house is,
in the neighborhood,
the fish is,
in the sea,
the sun is,
in the sky,
the sky, the clouds are.
rainy.
Great. Now here. So now you start the conversation and I'll continue it and I'll continue and I'm going to get you to go back. So you start the conversation.
The windows are,
Blue. And what do you think of them?
I like them. I actually really like the color.
What do you like about the color?
I like that it's not super bright and it's just neutral. I'm a very much a neutral color person.
That's cool. So do I.
Yeah,
Now, so it would teach you to start the conversation, continue the conversation, and then be able to stop the conversation. Right.
I love
So,
that.
and I thought, wow. So they that was just like the next level up was a very small growth on how to start the conversation, continue the conversation, and then stop the conversation. I'm like, well, that was pretty easy, right? And then
Yeah.
they got into, well, then how would you handle it if someone has an objection? You ever try to talk to somebody and they walk in, well, no, I want my finger hurts, right? And
Yep.
so they're trying to distract you. Oh, my finger. Great, your finger hurts, but I need you to. Thank you very much. We'll take care of that in a second. And you'd have a way to how to handle that, handle their concern, and keep them moving on course, right? And the whole course kept building on that. And imagine this: the last one was called bull baiting. Now, bull
Okay.
baiting was where they took is an old Spanish practice where they took bulls, tied them to a tree, and they would
Yep.
set the dogs off on them, and
Yep.
they would keep setting the dogs off on them until the bull didn't react, right?
Right.
And it would have you be able to stand in a conversation. So literally, while you're having a conversation with somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other people
Wow.
would walk in the room and say all kinds of obnoxious things. Hey, look at you, or hey, they would say weird things and sexy things, and their whole goal was to knock you off the conversation. But how
Yep.
did you stay present to stay in conversation with the person, no matter what was happening in the room? And all of that small training took lifts and got you to that point. Now, I think that's a great spot to look at is small little wins like that that take people through training that ultimately
Mhm.
get them to the big, powerful conversations that they're going to need to have on a day to day basis for you as a company. But how do we start off those training programs to build slowly with employees, those small little wins so they get to Friday and they go home over the weekend, they feel pretty good about the week they had. And then the next week they come back, they got the same kind of start.
Yep. I One of the things that I've seen that's worked really well is having like a Asana or some type of a project management system with the little check marks. And then like, instead of doing like a to-do list, like going back and looking at what you have accomplished. Because I know sometimes when we have a to-do list, it can feel really overwhelming, right? Because when you make a to-do list, you're like, oh man, I have like 9 more things to do. I only got to 5 today before lunch. But when you have a list where you've completed something and you make a list of that. So what I started doing now on Fridays is like instead of thinking about like what I didn't get to, I look at what I did get to. So like I did my LinkedIn live, I did 2 podcasts, I did this, right? I walk away on Friday feeling accomplished instead of feeling like, oh crap, I didn't get to the 6 things I wanted to get to. And those things I'll revisit on Monday. Go back to my list. But when I leave my desk on Friday, I look at the things that I did do. So I get that feeling of like, wow, I accomplished so many things. That's a good way to step into the weekend instead of like, oh man, like, because then you don't really get to enjoy it, right? Especially if you're like a type A person like I am, where I'm like always trying to be on it, right? And it's good to have a list that doesn't end. That means you're doing something in life. Like if you have a list that's completed, you probably need to start over or like get a hobby or do something, right? But for especially employees that are starting in and you're onboarding, giving them a list that's like, what have you accomplished? Where are the check marks, right? I think that's really the key is like giving them that feeling of walking away with accomplishment. And so encouraging them to create lists where they've accomplished something, or you creating like a Asana checkboard and they just check and the end of the week and it says like congratulations, you finished 9 out of the 11 items, right? So it changes on the focus. So instead of focusing on the 2 out of the 11 items you didn't get to, your now mindset is like, wow, I got to the 9 out of 11. So as soon as you change the outlook, it's like changing your shades. If you have brown color shades on, you're going to see everything in brown. If you have blue, you're going to see everything in blue. So like adding on shades and changing them, and so changing your perspective, and then you walk away with a totally different feeling and a sense of accomplishment instead of a sense of like I didn't get to it and therefore something's wrong with me.
That's a great way to look at it. So it's something else I want to talk about, and I could, when we look at this, we as a construction company are always looking at, we always expand and contrast, always expand and contrast. There's always, we get to run a projects for a company, and all of a sudden we've got, 15 of them, but all of a sudden, one of the hardest things that we go through is being able to keep the staffing at the right level, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be too staffed up, or you got too many people that aren't doing stuff. You don't want too much dead wood around. It makes the company unhealthy, right? But then whenever you get an opportunity for a project, sometimes we've got to staff up really quickly to go pick up projects. But it's always kind of hard. And what are some techniques that you've used to be able to kind of get people, go figure out who's out there, and then not necessarily bring them all on board, but what are some techniques for handling that ebb and flow of hiring, right?
Yeah.
How do you prep so that you've got a couple on deckers that are out there, but you're not bringing them on where it becomes dead wood.
Yep. I think a lot of this has to do with forecasting too. And a lot of people don't actually proactively do this at the end of each quarter or whatever, whenever your period, what you calculate on, right? So I do mine 12 weeks because we just read the book called The 12-Week Year, where he talks about, squeezing your 1 year in 12 weeks and like starting over again. So you've got to really start forecasting in terms of how many clients are coming in, how many clients are going to leave, how many are going to pause contract and maybe come back 3 weeks later. Once you have those forecasting goals, then doing anonymous surveys with your current team and seeing if they feel overburned, underburned, where are they in terms of efficiency. And I feel like anonymous surveys are the way to go because then you can tell if people feel like they're overworked and a certain department feels like they're doing way more than they have to, etc. Taking that into account and your forecasting, then you can say, you know what, my product team, there's 3 of them and they all feel really overburned. They're clearly doing way too much work and I don't want to lose any of them because they're awesome, right? Because anytime someone's overworked, overburned, they're going to leave. You're going to lose people like that. So then saying I'm going to add one product person because I know I have 5 new clients that are going to come in the next 6 to 9 weeks and I don't want my team to feel overburned. So really kind of having a pulse not just on the clients, which a lot of people do, but also internally what's going on. I think that's key as well, right? And then again, looking at also turnover. Like, are you expecting people to leave your company based on conversations that you're having? Like, if people aren't getting along, do you kind of have that orange flag up already? Like, this team, like, something's happening over here. I may have to start finding a backup, right? And then again, maybe do an anonymous job posting, or maybe start reaching out to people and don't post the job out there yet, but have a pipeline going. So if that person comes in on Friday and says, hey, this is my last day, you've already talked to a few people that you could hire within a week or two to kind of replace that. But a lot of this requires like get having a pulse on what's going on internally and what's coming in, right? And a lot of people, a lot of leadership isn't good at that. They just focus on what's coming in, but they don't really focus on how the team is feeling. And that's when you have turnover, is when you don't have a pulse on what's going on internally. And then it's really hard to hire somebody on a triage mode, right? Because then if someone leaves and you don't know what's going on, then you're like, I want to get the next person I talk to in here because I'm struggling. And that gets you into like that chicken and egg situation where again you have more turnover because that person wasn't the right person, because you didn't take the time, because you didn't forecast, and because you didn't have a pulse on what's coming in and what's in your company right now.
I feel like that's where the leader's number one, at least for me, I've noticed that having our leadership team always kind of on that pulse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our biggest communication, we speak every week about, kind of what's coming up, where we're at, work level load, how people are doing, what's the sense of how people are feeling, we start to really notice some real aspects of our projects. How many people are in for us, projects kind of have different different heat levels at different parts of the project. When you start a
Mm-hmm.
project, it's hot, right? You're starting it, you get
Yep.
people under contract, you get people moving, you're telling a story about what you want to do. In the middle of a project, it's kind of a more of maintenance, kind of making sure things are happening the way you wanted them to do. But then again, at the end of a project, you really start to notice, just it's overwhelming. There's always the
Mm-hmm.
5,000 20-minute jobs that nobody ever expects. There's contract breaks and change orders and things that the client wants to change, always happening simultaneously. So we got to really pay attention to our people as they're going through that, because we've got folks out there who never complain. They'll just keep doing it. But
Yep.
we know what the cost of that is on the human, right? Long term cost on our humans, right? You can't, you end up burning them out. Even the best of the best, get burned out. And I think that's a big job of management, to really
Yep.
pay attention to see what they're not saying, what your employees aren't saying, right? And start
Mm-hmm.
to notice those, those little pinches in their workday, those little things that
Yep.
we can do, making sure that they're being seen, because there are employees out there who love to. So some of them work really, really, or most employees work really, really hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're and most of the time they just want to make sure they're seen, and they want to make sure you're seeing that, right?
Exactly.
That you're noticing that, and somewhere they're going to be compensated for that. So you want to make sure that, and I feel like we do a good job of keeping people on the top level, the top talent level, so that we're always kind of at the top end of the scale for people that we're paying, and we're always trying to keep our employees, in that peak payment place, because they've earned it, right? Our people earn it,
Yep.
and they do a great job of doing that. And I find you find great tape, you find great people. The difference between good and the best in class, there's a dollar value difference, but the performance value is so dramatically different. There's no, there's no. I will tell you, every leader I've ever met, I'll tell them the same thing: hire best in class. It's
Yep.
worth the extra cost. If it's 100,000 employee or $115,000 employee or $120,000 employee, go for the 120. You'll make your money back 5 times if they're
Quicker.
best in class. And
Yep.
sometimes it's hard to digest. You're like, wow, that's 20% more or 25% more. That's a lot. And but the output on the backside, because of their value and who they are, pays off three or four X to that. So Neha, I listen. I love having you on. You're such a great insight
Likewise.
to me, and as a leader, having experts like you around to guide me and to guide us as we develop more and more organizations. I am. I'm really. I know how busy you are. Just want to take a second. I want the audience to get to know how to get a hold of you. And look, if they want to hire you and your group to come in and do to do work for them, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think the email, so neha.naik at recruitgyan.com, and then my website, recruitgyan.com, are like the two best ways to reach me. You can also check my LinkedIn out. It's Neha Dixit Naik. I'm assuming you're going to add all that in the
I'll
call
put
notes,
all that
Anthony.
down below.
Perfect.
Audience, make sure. Look, I dare you guys right now to give me a comment. Tell me what you do. What's your best practices? What are you doing to hire people? What incentives are you giving? What kind of motivation are you getting? Do you guys have any secret sauce that you're using? Is it like I buy movie tickets for my employees every week, or am I buying cars? Or what are the things that you're doing that are bringing them on? Motivating them. And look, we'll have Neha on again multiple times. So I just want you guys as an audience to take a second and put any of your comments down below. We'd love to have them. Neha and I really will appreciate that. And at the same time, take a second and like and subscribe. Look, it means the world to me and the entire podcast team, all the folks in the background that put this together. It takes a team of people to put this together. And every time you like and subscribe, it just says to them, thank you. And it just means the world to them. So if you guys could take a second and just honor the folks in the background and like and subscribe to the podcast, I would be entirely grateful for that. Neha, welcome again, and thank you for what you've done. You are a blessing to this planet and the work that you're doing in finding top talent around this world.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So happy to be here. And listeners, please reach out if you need anything. I'm always here to help.